wanted to share with you some of the paintings that I've done here at Clallam Bay. This area right here is the CD corridor, and we just try to beautify Clallam Bay Correctional Center. And there's also another painting that you'll see on there. Because Tartan Day is soon to be upon us, I wrote a speech on Tartan Day that I wanted to share with you guys about Scotland and Scotland's contribution here in the United States. So, if we can step into this other office here. Cool. So, I'm just going to read this to you guys, and hopefully everybody gets something out of it and appreciates it. So, the United States Senate designated April 6th of each year as National Tartan Day. This resolution honors the major role that Scottish Americans played in the founding of the United States, which I will share with you. Tartan Day is a national holiday. It is a day to honor the contributions, life, heritage, and culture of the Scottish. But first, let's learn a little bit about Scotland in order to do that. April 6th was chosen as Tartan Day because on this day in 1320, Robert the Bruce, the king, and 25 of his nobles drew up the Scottish Declaration of Independence, called the Letter of Arbroath, to which all the clans of Scotland affixed a ribbon of their plaid. This document is kept at the Register House in Edinburgh, and the Scots call it their most precious possession. So who are the Scots? Here is an excerpt from the Declaration. Quote, "We know, and from the chronicles and books of the ancients we find that among other famous nations, our own, the Scots, has been graced with wide renown. They journeyed from Greater Scythia by way of the Tyrrhenian Sea and the Pillars of Hercules, and dwelt for a long course of time in Spain among the most savage tribes. But nowhere could they be subdued by any race. Thence they came 1200 years after the people of Israel crossed the Red Sea to their home in the west, where they still live today. In their kingdom there have reigned 113 kings of their own royal stock, their line unbroken by a single foreigner." Did you catch that? This document ties the Scots with the Scythians and the Scythians with the Israelites. Greater Scythia was an Assyrian territory where Israel was held in captivity. Our story starts with a man named Darda, known as Dardanus, who led a group of Israelites out of Egypt, of who history records built the city of Troy in 1527 BC. The Bible's 1 Kings 4:31 compares his wisdom to that of Solomon, and 1 Chronicles 2:6 says that he was a direct descendant of Judah's son Zerah. This is important because the royal lineage of all the northwestern European kings comes from Wodan, and Wodan's genealogy traces back to Darda of Troy, according to the Icelandic Prose Edda. Scythian, or Scuthi, means dwellers in booths. In Paleo-Hebrew, it is Sukkoth. Herodotus describes them as very learned. Strabo says that they had excellent laws and habits, and were known as the righteous race. Sakai was the Persian form of Scythian. Epiphanius says the laws, customs, and manners of the Scythians were received by other nations as the standards of policy, civility, and polite learning. Diodorus, Herodotus, Strabo, Aeschylus, if I'm pronouncing that wrong, and Epiphanius, all ancient historians record that they abhorred swine's flesh. In 1493 BC, there was another migration out of Egypt led by Cadmus and Danaus arriving in Greece. The Manual of Ancient History records a Phoenician colony under Cadmus settled in Boeotia. He was the first who introduced the use of letters into Greece. The Phoenicians were the masters of the Aegean at this time. Famed pyramidologist Adam P. Rutherford confirms that this expedition occurred 310 years before the fall of Troy on June 11, 1183 BC, which is 1493 BC, the same year as the Israelites' exodus from Egypt, as Robert the Bruce mentioned. Diodorus Siculus states that Danaus settled the oldest city of Greece, Argos, and Dr. William Smith states that of all the heroic families of Greece, none was more heroic than the Danans of Argos. Dr. Robert Latham, in his Ethnology of Europe in 1852, states, "The origin of the name of the Argive Dani was no other than that of the Israelite tribe of Dan." Grecian, Irish, Scandinavian, and English histories are teeming with mentions of this race of Dani, Danans, or Danoi, also called Phoenicians. The name Dan is Paleo-Hebrew, and it means judge or lawgiver. In Gothic, Anglo-Saxon, English, and Scandinavian, din, dan, dun, don all signify the same thing, and the Spanish and Italians have a similar meaning in the word dawn. In the Norse, Odin means lawgiver. That brings us to the Tuatha De Danans, which I was taught in Gaelic as Tuatha De Danann, which in Gaelic means tribe of Dan. Some historians say warriors of Dan. The Encyclopedia of the Celts says of them, the people of Dana, they ruled Ireland after Nemed, according to the Book of Invasions, and were descended from one of his great-grandsons. They were supposed to come from the northern isles of Greece. They fought the Fomorians and Firbolgs, vanquished by the Milesians. The first wave of Tuatha De Danans arrived in Ireland in 1468 BC. There were 2 waves of them in Ireland. This would explain why these Danites called their new home Ar Zaret, which means another land of Israel. These were the fellows who immigrated to the next island and came to call themselves Scotsmen, for all Scotch means is Irisher. Who were these Milesians who defeated the Tuatha De Danann? Historian John Mitchell says that the Milesians came directly from Egypt to Spain in his History of Ireland around 1400 BC. And historian A.M. Sullivan says that the Milesian colony reached Ireland from Spain, but they were not Spaniards. And John Mitchell says that they called themselves the descendants of the Iberians or Scythians of the Black Sea. They identified themselves by their sacred banner of a dead serpent and the rod of Moses, revealing yet another connection to Israel. Iberian comes from the word Heber. At this time, southern Spain was known as Tarshish, identified by many as Tartessus, an ancient city located on the Atlantic coast of Spain, but long lost. This is where we get the word Tartan. Consider this excerpt, and that's my opinion. Consider this excerpt. Surely the isles shall wait for me, and the ships of Tarshish first, to bring thy sons from afar, unto the Lord thy God, the Holy One of Israel, because he hath glorified thee. That's Isaiah 60, verse 9. And 2nd Esdras and Isaiah 49:12 records that these people would abide in the isles northwest of Palestine. In Spain, to this day, there is a Celtic nation called Galicia. These people claim from ancient times that they are the Gaelic or Gaulish people who came from Galatia, or the land of the Gauls in the Bible. Professor L.A. Waddell in the Phoenician Origin of the Britons, Scots, and Anglo-Saxons says, quote, the title Hibernia for Ireland and Hebrides for the West Isles are survivals of the Iberia title for the primitive stock which first propelled the British Isles in the Stone Age. Thomas More, in his History of Ireland in 1843, says the first inhabitants of Ireland were derived from the same Celtic stock which supplied Gaul, Britain, and Spain with their original populations. Both Ireland and Spain were originally called Hibernia, and the peninsula of Spain was called the Iberian Peninsula. Going back to the symbol of the serpent, everywhere that these Danites went, they left their mark in fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And if we follow their migrations where they left their mark, it looks like a serpent. Let us follow their waymarks. We begin with the Dongola of the Red Sea, and on to the Caledon of Greece, and to Eridan of Attica, and to Macedon, and then to the Danube, to the Danistris, to the Dnieper, then to the Don, the river Rodan, to Sardinia, to Venetia or Phoenicia, the Danister, to Danzig, to Coden, to Dannemora, to Danemark or Dansmark, what we call Denmark, to the Doncaster, to the Danonia, finally to the land of the Danans and the Isles, which, with popular places like Dundalk, Donega, Donegal, or London. From ancient Scotia, or Caledonia, and Dundee, and Aberdeen, just to mention a few. While the Milesians were in Spain, the Tuatha De Danann were occupying Ireland. Historian Jeffrey Keating says Melita, for whom the Milesians are named, returned from Spain to Egypt to help Pharaoh in his war against Ethiopia. He was rewarded with a wife whose name was Skoda. The second wave of the Tuatha-De Danans in 720 BC, migrating in Ireland, also has the tribe of Simeon called the Simoni, migrating into Wales. The Danans stopped for some time in northern Scotland. Jeffrey Keating says the Milesians and Danans were the same race, their language being pure Irish, nearly identical with the Paleo-Hebrew. And notice that there was nary a variation in the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet and the Phoenician. Dr. Margoliouth, forgive the mispronunciation, wrote in 1870, I might adduce an array of whole sentences exactly alike in the language of Hebrew and the ancient Cornish. Famed translator and martyr William Tyndale in 1574 says that the properties of the Hebrew tongue agreeth 1,000 times more with the English than with the Latin or the Greek. And Dr. E. Raymond Capt states over 75% of English words come direct from Hebrew or their root. And in 1869, R. Govett, in his etymology, says that there is not 5% Saxon that can't be traced back to Hebrew. The Milesians were sometimes called Galileans, from a leader named Gadhall. The most ancient Irish chronicles asserts in general the Galileans were called Scots because they came from Scythia and called Scoti or Scots, and even Ireland was called Scotia, which brings us back to Skoda. According to the Chronicles of Scotland, Skoda was the daughter of King Zedekiah, who was taken to Egypt by the prophet Jeremiah. Upon the king's death, and then to Spain, where she married a man named Gathalus, king of the Argives. He named his land Scotland, or Skoda's land, after his wife. In due time, a son was born named Jokadiah the Haramon, or king. Jeremiah also brought with him the stone upon which the biblical Jacob rested his head at Bethel. This stone was used to coronate in Solomon's temple. The Annals of the Kingdom of Ireland by the Four Masters record this history, as well as the 4th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica. The stone is red sandstone native to Palestine. In Gaelic, the stone is called Leah Baal, which can be read from right or left, and means the stone of destiny. It was kept in the capital of Ireland, Tara, for 3 centuries, and all the kings were crowned upon it. In 350 BC, it was sent to Scotland for the coronation of Fergus, king of the Scots, a Milesian. There it was called the Stone of Scone, and all the kings of Scotland were crowned upon it until 1297 AD, when King Edward I captured it and took it back to England, placing it in Westminster Abbey, its home ever since. It was built into the coronation chair, the oldest piece of furniture in England still serving its purpose. All English kings have been crowned upon it since. It has throughout been known as Jacob's Stone. But of course, we know our story doesn't end there. The Danites were the premier colonizers. And if you look at European heraldry, especially that of Scotland, you will see the ships of Tarshish. We read in Isaiah 49:19 that the isles became too cramped for their descendants, so they left the isles in search of more room. And in verse 20, which I contend identifies North America and other lands. In 1977, Dr. Donald G. Rickey, who was the chief historian for the Bureau of Land Management, discovered Ogham inscriptions in Colorado. Ogham is a grooved writing system used by the ancient Celts, carved into stone. He contacted Harvard professor Dr. Barry Fell, author of America BC, who agreed that it was Ogham of the older all-consonant variety. And one must remember that Paleo-Hebrew is also an all-consonant system. There is extensive evidence of Ogham in the United States compiled in the book Colorado Ogham Album by Donald L. Sear. And Ogham is spelled O-G-H-A-M. This book contains over 180 photos. Dr. Barry Fell's book, America BC, documents the Phoenician settlements around the Great Lakes when massive mining was taking place during the time King David was collecting bronze to build the temple. Only Phoenicia had access to the ocean at this time. There were Phoenician colonies in the Americas as early as 1000 BC. The Annals of Ireland by the Four Masters says, quote, "The colony called Tuatha De Danann were a highly civilized people, far more skilled in arts and sciences than any other colonies. They were highly skilled in architecture and other arts from their long residences in Greece and Phoenicia." Obviously, this was a very prolific people. But what can we really attribute to the Scots today? Here is a list of a few notables. James Braid, surgeon, physician, and pioneer in the practice of hypnosis. He is also known as the father of hypnosis. Sir Alexander Fleming, the scientist who discovered penicillin. He was knighted in 1944 and won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1945. He also discovered the vaccine for typhoid. Sir James Young Simpson, pioneer in anesthetics during surgery and childbirth. Sir Patrick Mason discovered malaria was transmitted by mosquitoes. Dr. Logie Baird invented the television in 1926. He and Sir Alexander Watson Watt developed radar and fiber optics. Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, the phonograph, hydrofoils, and an iron lung. Reverend Alexander John Forsyth invented the percussion cap, the predecessor of the modern bullet. John McAdam invented asphalt, and the very first road was laid in Paris in 1854. Charles Mackintosh invented waterproof fabric to make raincoats, something much needed in Scotland. Now you may be wondering, what can we really say about Scottish Americans? Well, statesman Alexander Hamilton, the